Hello there, I'm Maddie Osmond, the founder of the Blogsmith. I've probably chatted with all, if not most of you, but I wanted to show up today to share a little bit about our research with the most recent core and algorithm updates in Google. So this is a page from them. It shares what they're willing to share about what they've updated in search. There are certainly many updates that are missing from this list because they kind of purposefully obscure that information. They don't want us to know every single algorithm update they make so that we don't game the algorithm, of course, but they do tell us about the big ones. So you'll notice in September there was a major core update. In August, but technically rolling out in September as well, was the helpful content algorithm update. And then another update in September was the product reviews update. And then another recent one, just in terms of timeliness for recording this video, is one that happened just a few days ago, the spam algorithm update. And as you can kind of see here, a lot has been happening in this quarter compared to really the rest of the year. It's been a really busy time. Definitely search engine rankings have been shaken up. And so I just wanted to take the opportunity to kind of explain like what all of this means and, you know, what you should pay attention to and whether you should be worried or not. One thing that I wanted to start with is another Google page here that explains core updates in general. So you might have heard me say algorithm and core updates. And I think, I could kind of use Google's own words here. Really the difference between a core and algorithm update, and this might be oversimplifying things a bit, but just bear with me. From my perspective, an algorithm update is typically targeting specific types of content or categories. So for example, we're going to talk about the product reviews update, and that is really targeting sites that do a lot of long form product reviews. So if that's not something that you publish on your site, it's really not something to worry about at this point. A core algorithm update is, I think, a little bit more holistic. It's not really targeting, as they say, like specific pages or anything like that. And I really like, I guess, the example that they give here, which is one way to think of how a core update works is think about a list that's the top 100 movies in 2021. Naturally, as time goes by, if you're revisiting that list in 2024, it's going to look a little bit different because there's been a lot of new movies that have come out that are, adding to that list. And it's actually, in fact, a new list. If it's like the top 100 movies ever, even that list is going to change regardless of what year it started. And so, again, it's allowing for sort of natural changes. It's allowing for things that just happen in real life. You have to reassess, you have to refresh in some cases. It's not good or bad, it's just about really relevance. So this is I will be sharing some of these resources with you as I go over them in this video. And again, Google is a really good resource in general for just trying to understand really like the why behind these algorithm updates. I do want to share a couple of other details, and we can just maybe go back to this page so you can again see kind of like the recent updates as I explain these. But wanted to share just a couple things to think about in general when algorithm updates happen, and then we can get into the specific ones happening, in Q4 of the year here. So algorithm updates, at least the ones that we're talking about today, it's not so much about creating penalties. It's more about new signals that affect rankings that maybe didn't or maybe not as proportionately in the past. So don't think about your site as being penalized. It's just sort of in some ways reordering rankings if you are kind of going against their guidelines, which we'll go through. Right now, the ones that we're talking about specifically, we're going to focus on the product reviews update and the helpful content update. The spam update seems perhaps less relevant, because it just rolled out, so there's not as much detail to it, but also because we are not creating spammy content for our clients, and hopefully that you don't work with anybody else who does. I think the one thing that might be a worry to you is if you're using totally AI generated content. That is something that the Google Quality Rater Guidelines does specifically call out as being quote unquote spam. So we're not going to touch on it for those reasons. Other things that might be relevant in general, broad core updates. So like this one in September 12th, those tend to happen every few months, whereas algorithm updates, as you can kind of see here, may happen more often. Again, it really just depends, because you can see like the end of last year and the beginning of this year, was a decently high concentration of updates, but then nothing really happened in the middle of the year until now. So there's no total rhyme or reason to it, but the broad core updates happen less often. And then a last sort of broad thing to keep in mind about algorithm or core updates is that these updates, a core algorithm update usually takes 1 to 2 weeks to fully roll out. And so because of this, you probably want to wait to react and make any changes to your website for at least 3 weeks after it's, been known to roll out. You want to give some time for things to shake out a little bit. They typically do after an algorithm update. Typically, people see some immediate changes, but then they sort of settle back in as the algorithm works out its own kinks. And then another thing that I thought was interesting is that the 2 updates that we're going to talk about today, helpful content and product reviews, it's only affecting English sites to start, which to me suggests a longer overall rollout period than the one that's given of, a couple weeks or whatever it is. So, they kind of start with one market and then they roll it out to the whole market. But as rolling it out to the entire world, they may, continue to adjust their algorithm once they factor in more than just English language sites. So let's get into the specific updates. The first one is the helpful content update. So here's yet another page from Google that you can reference that gives a lot of really useful guidelines and sort of like questions to answer in terms of like, is this people first? Is this truly helpful? Is this, perhaps focusing too much on the search engine side of things while negatively impacting the human? So a couple things, that we found when digging into this. This is kind of like the executive summary. First of all, it's a site-wide signal, the helpful content update, that evaluates if your domain has too much unhelpful content. So in a way, it's almost not even just about having helpful content. It's about, does your site have unhelpful content? That's what's going to hurt rankings more than like helpful content is going to boost you up, if that makes sense. So it specifically targets content that seems to have been primarily created for ranking well in search engines rather than to help or inform people. And so because of that, if there's too much unhelpful content, it will hurt the visibility of all your content. If that's the case again. So any content, not just unhelpful content, and sites determined to have relatively high amounts of unhelpful content overall is less likely to perform well in search. Removing unhelpful content could help with that in mind. So I think this is something to think about, like beyond working with the Blogsmith. If you've worked with other writers in the past that maybe didn't have the same approach as we do, we do, per kind of like my book, Writing for Humans and Robots, we put the human first. So we've been building really with this in mind. I think that we've known that this is what Google has always wanted to do. It's just a matter of how do they, kind of like objectively figure out metrics around that, like how can they create their algorithm around that. But this is something that we've always planned for. Google has always said that good content is the goal, great content for humans. They've always said, like, if you focus on that, you don't have to worry so much about everything else. Of course, there are still on-page best practices. We can still be really thoughtful with keyword research and, optimizing around intent. And, another thing that we focus on a lot is creating unique angles so that it's not just like anything else that's already out there. And I think another thing that Google appreciates, and I think there is a note here that I'll give you, is, like adding in insight from like an expert source. And so that's another thing that we've been pushing a lot internally is working with sources and having that original content that we can add, from an expert point of view who truly understands the subject. So that's just something to keep in mind in general. What else is important to mention here? This is just a note some people first content on sites classified as having unhelpful content could still rank well if there are other signals identifying that people first content as helpful and relevant to a query. So I think that's where it comes back to intent, which is something that we spend a lot of time classifying, understanding, and optimizing for, both in the keyword research process and then in our outlining and drafting stages. So again, this isn't a core update. This is an algorithm update, which means it does affect like specific pages. And interestingly enough, so far, it's kind of too soon to tell, but so far it's had a very relatively minor impact on search rankings. There's a search engine roundtable article here that mentions that they surveyed some SEOs and, whoever they surveyed, obviously, only 20% noticed ranking changes, and Search Engine Roundtable is saying that they might be confused and misattributing those things to, perhaps, for example, some of the other algorithm updates that happen, like the core algorithm update, or perhaps like the product reviews update. So I think the major takeaway that I have is that it's not so much about things getting penalized or dropping in rankings right now. It's more Google trying to set the tone for the future direction versus, again, like shaking up rankings in the meantime. So, some like very last thoughts here on that, and then we'll move on to the product reviews update, is just that, again, we have, the book kind of summarizes Writing for Humans and Robots is kind of like our version of the helpful content update. The Blogsmith style guide, we'll also share another link to that. That's another way to see like how we put humans first. And one more detail is like the most affected sites were online educational materials, entertainment, shopping, and tech-related content. So that could certainly be some of you listening to this. But again, I would just caution you not to react to it until it's had a little bit more time to shake itself out. And then I think that the next step is really like digging into like maybe some of the older content that you had and seeing if that's something that we could refresh, or if it might even be worth just getting rid of. Those are some very initial reactions that we could have to this. So other action items in general, I think these are things that the Blogsmith already does, but it might be something for you to think about with other people, freelancers, or agencies that you work with. So Google wants you to focus content on a specific industry or niche. So make sure that your topics are at least relevant and related to your main niche. They can certainly go in like different directions. Like if we're talking about a sales productivity tool, you can talk about sales, you can talk about productivity, you could probably talk about marketing. I'm, again, like brushing with broad strokes here, but it's just like you wouldn't talk about pet food or something, right? So that's one thing. Make sure that your content is actionable. I think we do this in several ways in terms of setting the stage with a useful intro, a table of contents, list snippets that we expand on, conclusions suggesting next steps, examples, etc. Continually update your content, keep it up to date, fresh, relevant, so that it gives users the most benefits. If you need help refreshing old pieces, please let us know. And then also adding relatable experiences to your content. So that's like the subject matter expert stuff that we talked about earlier. So let's move on to the product reviews update, and I'll try to keep this one really short because there's not a whole lot to say, and I don't think that most clients this totally affects. So anyway, it's most relevant to websites that review content, like say, for example, affiliate marketing sites that exist to, drive conversions and commissions. And specifically websites that publish long-form product reviews. So this reviews update aims to promote review content that is above and beyond much of the templated information you see on the web. So it's not a penalty, nor is it a core update, but it promotes or rewards insightful analysis and original research. So again, we're kind of going back to like the subject matter idea, and like if you're writing a review, like do you actually have the expertise to share that? Or, are you kind of like making guesses? Have you actually used like a software tool that you're reviewing? And can you prove that by sharing examples and, applied use cases and things like that? I know that there are some posts that we create for some clients that are reviews. So, these are things that we definitely keep in mind. And so again, like the helpful content update, they're not going to penalize websites. Instead, websites that have better content and, can showcase more true wisdom versus, parroting information that already exists will rank higher. So, and then the last thing I think that I can say here is that from this update, the affected sites, which again are those that publish long form product reviews, did have significantly more shakeups than with the helpful content update. So again, this one is only really relevant to you if you publish that type of content, but the helpful content is relevant to everyone. And luckily, the helpful content update hasn't significantly changed search from what we've seen so far. So I really hope this was helpful. I know it was a little bit on the long side. I did want to get into the nuance and share a couple of resources, but please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or if you want to kind of like dig more into your data and see what we could do to help you with these updates.